So, this is a presentation on clarity. And a great deal of the material here, not the examples, but some of the basic points, comes from Joe Williams's classic book, Style Towards Clarity and Grace. It's now been in several other editions since that time. So, the first thing is to note that clarity is a value that is pretty much accepted in any writing course that you will take. You will find very few people who will say, don't be clear, or I don't care about clarity. It is ancient. Aristotle, in his famous text, The Rhetoric, called clarity the chief virtue of style. It is, as I said, more or less universal. You won't find anybody in the study of style or writing who argues against clarity as such, although some people will argue that certain writers will tend to be usefully obscure, but those are almost always literary writers, not pragmatic writers, such as you are trying to be. It is also unarguable. I mean, honestly, can you think of a reason to say, well, we should be a little more obscure there, or a little less clear? The absurdity of that becomes apparent fairly quickly. Now, when we say something is clear, what do we mean? There are basically two ways we can talk about clarity. One way is to think of clarity as a property of a text. That is, texts are clear or unclear in themselves. This seems problematic because we all know that some things are clear because you're the right person to read them. You can think of texts, maybe actual text messages sent by your friends that seem perfectly clear to you because you're part of that community, but are not clear, for example, to me or to your parents. So clarity doesn't seem to reside in texts. It's not that texts are clear or unclear. Well, if it doesn't reside in texts, where would it reside? And the answer is that it resides in us. That is to say, when we say something is clear, what we mean is it seems clear to me. We're not actually naming something that is in the text, but we are naming our psychological impression. This means that clarity is a relative property, not an absolute property. Some things are clear to some people, but obscure to others. It is also a readerly property. You may remember that I used that word before, and I might use it again. It is something that readers decide whether a text is clear. A writer can't say, well, I think the text is clear. You should think it's clear too. That's really up to the reader. It is also something that is based upon our expectations. That is, we expect text to be clear, and most of the time we expect text to be clear because they meet certain other expectations. We expect certain things to happen in sentences. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about clarity as something that happens within sentences, that is to say, at the sentence level. So, when is a sentence clear? What makes it clear? And I will give the following definition. A sentence is clear when the right reader, that is the reader that's intended, gets the right meaning, that is the meaning that's intended, the first time, that is without reading the sentence twice. Again, a sentence is clear when the right reader gets the right meaning the first time. So, I'm going to look at three principles of clarity. Each one, I'll give an example. So for the first example, for the first principle, we look at a sentence like, our company can realize a real improvement in your website. And if you find that that sentence is not particularly well written or maybe a little bit unclear, you would not be alone. I would agree with you. What's wrong with it? And how do we diagnose it? One of the problems is the word realize. Our company can realize. What does that mean? That seems wrong. Our company can realize. If you think about that, what is realize? Well, it's the verb of the sentence, and although you don't need to know a whole lot of grammar in order to understand clarity, you really do need to know where the verb is in a sentence. But I don't think that verb names the action, the real activity of the sentence. Is this really a sentence about a company realizing something? Or is that a kind of jargon, kind of BS business word that people use? Well, if you look elsewhere in the sentence, it says we can realize an improvement. Improvement might be a better word. The problem is that it is not the verb. It is in fact a noun. So the solution in this case is to take another word in the sentence and transform that noun into a verb. So, if you take that sentence, we can realize, our company can realize an improvement in your website, and change improvement to improve. We can improve your website. That sentence is shorter. It is also more meaningful because the word improve actually designates the action of the sentence. And it's easy to read. You cannot read that sentence. Most readers would not read that sentence without knowing precisely what it means. There's very little danger of misunderstanding. I'll name these principles in a minute, but let's go on to the second principle. Here's another sentence, somewhat similar. Improvements in website design lead to increased numbers of customers. Well, look at the core of that sentence, the subject and the verb. The subject is improvements and the verb is lead. Improvements lead to numbers. Well, that's not a very clear sentence. Most readers would find that a sentence they'd have to puzzle over a couple of times, or at least pause the first time while reading to process, maybe longer than they should. One of the problems is the word improvements. Improvements. What role does that play in the sentence? It's the subject. And just like the verb, the subject is something that you should be able to find in a sentence. Pretty much, if you can identify the subject and the verb of a sentence, you can go a long way toward making sentences clearer. If you can't, then making sentences clearer will be very difficult for you. So, you don't need to know a whole lot of grammar, but you do need to be able to identify the subject and the verb. So improvement, or improving, is the subject, but that's not a character. That's not a. Would you say the sentence is about that? That seems rather strange. What would be better? Well, what's a better character? Well, maybe the website. The website's actually what you're talking about, is the website. But the website's not the subject. So again, the idea is to transform the sentence by taking a word that is elsewhere in the sentence and making it play this role of the subject, which is to say the character. So, better designed websites lead to more customers. I think that's a clearer sentence. And one of the reasons I think it's clearer is that if the subject is a website, we know what the sentence is about. The website is, we can call it the character, the main actor. These websites lead to more customers. if I just say the core words of that sentence, websites lead to customers, then I know what the sentence is about. It's concrete. I know what a website is. Improvements is a little more abstract. When I say something is concrete, I mean it's a thing, or it's a person, or it's an institution. A website is a thing. You might think, well, a website is an abstraction, but it's not an abstraction like a process is, like an improvement. And finally, principle 3. This is the last of the 3 principles. These are fairly simple to explain, but all of them are pretty complicated to implement. Well, not complicated, but it just takes practice. These are actually fairly easy once you figure it out, but you have to practice them, like any skill. So, my opinion that the position does not pay enough for the responsibilities described in the advertisement stands. That's actually a sentence that I could read in a lot of letters or descriptions of employment practices and so forth. Well, here the problem isn't in the subject or the verb necessarily, but in the relationship between them, and in particular the distance. The subject is my opinion. So that has to do something, that has to be related to some verb. Well, what's the verb? It may take a while to find it because there are several other things that you have to juggle around mentally in order to figure that out, but the verb is actually stands. My opinion stands. But the word stands is not next to the word my opinion. It is in fact far away. How far? It is 14 words from stands. My opinion is this: the position does not pay enough for the responsibilities described in the advertisement. That puts the subject is right next to the verb my opinion. It makes the whole core of the sentence immediate. The first thing you see is what the sentence is about and what the sentence does. So, to summarize these 3 principles, they are as follows. First, state the action in the verb. That doesn't mean come up with fancy verbs for your dull verbs, but it does mean make sure that the thing that is the verb in the sentence actually states the action that you mean. This usually means look somewhere else in the sentence for a good candidate. Don't look outside the sentence. Look for a noun that you can convert into a verb, or sometimes an adjective that you can convert into a verb. Second, make sure that the subject of the sentence is your main character. Not an abstraction if possible, not a process, but more often than not, a thing, a person, an institution, something that is concrete. Third, get the verb close to the subject. Count the words. When you see the subject, you should see the verb soon after. Not 14 words, probably not more than 5. You can have some distance, but the closer you get, the more likely people will see what you mean. So that's what I have to say. And there will be an image that you can review so you can see all of this together and an exercise to follow. All right, take care.